The fence wire gleamed silver in the moonlight, cut clean through for the ninth night in a row, and Quinlan Ingram knew that if he did not find the culprit soon, his entire ranch would collapse around him like a house of cards in a desert windstorm. He stood there in the pre-dawn darkness of April 1882, his boots sinking slightly into the Arizona soil, his jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Camp Verde was supposed to be his fresh start, the place where he would build something lasting after years of drifting from Colorado to Texas to California and back again. He had saved every dollar, every cent, working cattle drives and breaking horses until his hands were leather and his back was steel. This land, these 300 acres of scrubland and creek water, represented everything he had ever worked for. And someone was destroying it piece by piece, night after night, with methodical precision that spoke of either deep hatred or cold calculation. The cut was clean, done with wire cutters, and his 20 head of cattle had wandered a quarter-mile downstream before he found them that morning. Another week of this, and they would scatter so far he would lose half of them to the wilderness, or to rustlers who would not hesitate to rebrand them and sell them in Prescott. He had tried staying up himself, patrolling the fence line with his Winchester, but his land stretched too far for one man to cover, and whoever was doing this seemed to know exactly where he was not looking. Quinlan was 26 years old, built like the cottonwood trees that grew along the creek, tall and solid and weathered beyond his years. His dark hair hung past his collar, and his eyes were the color of creek water in shadow, gray-green and unreadable. He was not a man given to asking for help, but pride would not keep his ranch running. Pride would not pay his debts or keep his cattle from scattering across the Verde Valley like seeds in a windstorm. He rode into town that afternoon, his horse's hooves kicking up red dust along the wagon road. Camp Verde was small, a collection of adobe and wood frame buildings clustered along the creek where the army had once maintained a fort. Most of the soldiers had moved on, but the town remained, stubborn and sun-baked, populated by ranchers, miners, and the sort of people who did not ask too many questions about where you came from or why you had chosen this particular patch of desert to call home. The general store stood on the main street, its false front painted white, though the sun had bleached it to the color of old bone. Quinlan tied his horse to the rail and stepped inside, where the air was 10 degrees cooler and smelled of coffee beans and leather and lamp oil. The storekeeper, a barrel-chested man named Morrison, nodded from behind the counter. "Quinlan, what can I do for you?" "I need information more than supplies," Quinlan said, removing his hat. "You hear about anyone in town who might have a grudge against me? Anyone talking about my ranch?" Morrison's face creased with concern. "Heard about your fence trouble. That is a bad business. But no, I have not heard any talk. Most folks around here got their own problems without borrowing yours." "Someone is borrowing them anyway," Quinlan said flatly. "9 nights running now. Whoever it is knows the land, knows my patterns." "Could be someone who wants your water access," Morrison suggested. "That creek runs year-round. Plenty of men would pay good money for a reliable water source, and some might rather take it than pay for it." Quinlan had considered this, but the thought made his blood run cold. If this was about the water rights, then it would not stop with cut fences. It would escalate until someone ended up dead, and he had seen enough killing in his younger days to last him a lifetime. He was standing there trying to decide his next move when the door opened behind him, and he heard a woman's voice, clear and precise, with an accent that marked her as educated in a way that was uncommon in Camp Verde. "Mr. Morrison, I need 3 spools of copper wire, a box of nails, and that book you ordered for me from Prescott." Quinlan turned and found himself looking at a woman he had never seen before, which was notable because Camp Verde was small enough that everyone knew everyone, at least by sight. She was perhaps 23 or 24, with black hair pinned up in a practical bun and eyes the color of desert sage, gray-green with flecks of silver. She wore a split riding skirt and a white blouse, dusty from travel, and she carried herself with a straight-backed confidence that reminded him of army officers he had known. "Miss Ashford," Morrison said, his voice warming considerably. The book came in yesterday. Let me get it for you. Ashford. Quinlan turned the name over in his mind, but came up empty. He would have remembered if he had heard it before. The woman glanced at him, a quick assessing look that took in his worn clothes, his calloused hands, the way he stood with his weight balanced like a man ready for trouble. Her expression did not change, but something flickered in her eyes, some calculation or recognition that he could not quite read. "You are Quinlan Ingram," she said. It was not a question. "I am." He kept his voice neutral, polite. "I do not believe we have met." "We have not. I am Adelaide Ashford. I bought the old Miller property 3 weeks ago." The Miller property. That was the land directly west of his, 100 acres of rocky soil and juniper scrub that old Jacob Miller had worked until a fever took him last winter. Quinlan had considered buying it himself to expand his grazing range, but he had not had the capital, and the bank in Prescott had been unwilling to extend him more credit until he proved his current ranch could turn a profit. "Welcome to Camp Verde," Quinlan said, though the words felt oddly hollow. A woman buying property on her own was unusual, though not unheard of, especially if she was a widow or had money from back east. "Are you planning to ranch it?" "I am planning to live on it," Adelaide said evenly. "What I do beyond that is my own business." There was no hostility in her tone, just a firm boundary being set, and Quinlan nodded once in acknowledgement. He was not a man to pry into other people's affairs. Morrison returned with a leather-bound book and set it on the counter along with the wire and nails. "Here you are, Miss Ashford. That will be $4 even." Adelaide paid in silver coins, counted out precisely, and gathered her purchases. As she turned to leave, she paused and looked back at Quinlan. "I heard about your fence trouble," she said. "If you need an extra pair of eyes at night, I am a light sleeper and a fair hand with a rifle." The offer caught him completely off guard. He studied her face, looking for mockery or pity, but found neither. She was simply stating a fact, offering help in the same way she might offer to lend him a tool or directions to the nearest water source. "I appreciate the offer," Quinlan said slowly, "but it is dangerous work. Whoever is doing this is not looking to get caught, and they might be armed." "I assumed as much." Adelaide's expression did not change. "The offer stands regardless. I know what it is like to have someone try to drive you off your land. Sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to back down." There was a story there, Quinlan could tell. Something in the set of her jaw and the way her hand rested easily on the leather satchel at her side, as if she was used to carrying weight and did not flinch from it. But he did not ask, and she did not elaborate. She simply nodded once more and left the store, the door swinging shut behind her with a soft click. Morrison watched her go, then turned back to Quinlan with raised eyebrows. "She is an interesting woman, that one. Came here from Philadelphia 3 weeks back, bought the Miller place with cash money, and has been fixing it up herself. Does not talk much about her past, but she knows her way around a ranch. I have seen her working her own fence line, digging post holes like she was born to it." "Philadelphia to Camp Verde is a long journey for a woman alone," Quinlan observed. "It is a long journey for anyone," Morrison agreed. "But like I said, she does not talk about her reasons, and I do not ask. None of my business, and none of yours either, unless you plan to take her up on her offer." Quinlan left the store with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Adelaide Ashford was not a typical woman, not by the standards of Camp Verde or anywhere else he had been. A woman who could handle a rifle and was willing to spend her nights watching for fence cutters was either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish, and he had a suspicion it was the former. That night, he found the fence cut in a new location, further north along the creek, where the land rose into a series of low hills covered in juniper and manzanita. The cut was as clean as the others, and his cattle had wandered into the hills, where retrieving them would take most of the next day. He stood there in the darkness, his Winchester in his hands, and felt the slow burn of anger in his chest give way to something colder and more determined. he would not be driven off this land. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to let some anonymous saboteur destroy everything he had built. And if that meant accepting help from a woman he barely knew, a stranger from Philadelphia with secrets in her eyes and the posture of someone who had learned to stand alone, then so be it. The next morning, Quinlan rode to the old Miller place. The property sat in a shallow valley between two ridges, the land rocky and covered with scrub but beautiful in its own stark way. The house was a small adobe structure with a tin roof, and someone had been working on it steadily. He could see fresh mortar between the bricks and new glass in the windows. A corral had been built beside the house, sturdy and well constructed, and a bay mare watched him approach with calm curiosity. Adelaide was on the roof, hammering down a loose section of tin. She looked up as he rode in, shading her eyes against the morning sun, then climbed down with easy grace. She wore the same practical clothing as the day before, and her hands were gloved against the work. "Mr. Ingram," she said, brushing dust from her skirt, "I assume you are here to take me up on my offer." "If it still stands," Quinlan said, dismounting. "I would be grateful for the help. I will pay you for your time." "I do not want your money," Adelaide said flatly. "I want to live on my land without worrying that whoever is targeting you will decide to target me next. If we stop this now, it benefits both of us." She had a point, and Quinlan could not argue with the logic. Fair enough. The fence was cut again last night, further north this time. Whoever is doing this is moving around, trying to cover more ground and keep me off balance. "Then we will need to cover ground as well," Adelaide said. "I suggest we split the fence line. You take the southern section, I will take the northern. We each patrol our area on foot and stay hidden. If either of us sees someone, we fire a warning shot to scare them off and alert the other." It was a solid plan, better than anything Quinlan had come up with on his own. "You have done this before." "Something like it," Adelaide said. And again there was that hint of a story, a past that she kept close to her chest, like a poker hand. "What time do you want to start?" "Sundown. We will meet at the northern boundary of my land, where it joins the creek." "I will be there." Adelaide held out her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, Quinlan shook it. Her grip was firm, her palm calloused from work, and he felt a strange jolt of connection, like touching a live wire or a spark jumping between two pieces of flint. They met that evening, as the sun dipped below the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and crimson and deep purple. The air was cooling rapidly, the desert giving up its heat to the vast emptiness above, and the first stars were beginning to appear. Adelaide arrived on foot, her rifle slung over her shoulder and a canteen at her hip. She wore dark clothing that would blend into the shadows, and her hair was tied back in a tight braid. "The northern section is about 2 miles of fence line," Quinlan said, pointing into the darkness. "It follows the creek up into the hills and then turns east toward the road. There are plenty of places to hide, but also plenty of places for someone to approach without being seen." "I will make a circuit every hour," Adelaide said. "If I see anything, I will fire once into the air. You do the same. And if they are armed and do not want to be scared off?" Adelaide's expression was calm, almost serene. "Then I will do what needs to be done. But let us hope it does not come to that." They separated into the darkness, and Quinlan made his way south along the fence line. The night was quiet except for the whisper of wind through the juniper and the distant call of a coyote somewhere in the hills. He moved slowly, checking the fence every 100 yards, his eyes adjusting to the darkness until he could make out shapes and shadows. The moon was a silver crescent, offering just enough light to navigate by, but not enough to be seen easily. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. Quinlan began to wonder if the saboteur had somehow known they would be watching tonight, had decided to take a night off. But then, around 2 in the morning, he heard it. The soft clink of metal on metal, the sound of wire cutters biting through fence line. He froze, every sense suddenly sharp and focused. The sound came from the east, near the road. in a section he had already checked an hour ago. Whoever it was had waited for him to pass and then moved in behind him. Smart, patient. This was not some drunken cowboy causing trouble for the fun of it. This was someone with a plan. Quinlan moved toward the sound, keeping low, his rifle ready. He could see a shape now, a man kneeling by the fence, working quickly and efficiently. The man wore dark clothes and a wide-brimmed hat, and he had a horse tied in the scrub nearby, barely visible in the darkness. Quinlan raised his rifle and fired once into the air. The crack of the gunshot split the night like thunder, and the man by the fence jerked upright, spinning toward the sound. For a moment, Quinlan thought the man would run, but instead, he reached for something at his belt, a gun or a knife. It was impossible to tell in the darkness. Then a second shot rang out from the north, Adelaide's signal, and Quinlan realized with a sinking feeling that there were two of them, two saboteurs working different sections of the fence. He had been focused on the man in front of him and had not considered the possibility of accomplices. The man by the fence made his decision. He vaulted onto his horse and kicked it into a gallop, heading east toward the road and away from Quinlan's position. Quinlan ran after him, but on foot he had no chance of catching a mounted rider. He fired once more, aiming over the man's head, but the rider did not slow. Within seconds he was gone, swallowed by the darkness and the desert. Quinlan turned and ran north toward Adelaide's position, his heart pounding. If there was a second saboteur up there, if she had confronted him alone, if things had gone wrong, he pushed the thoughts away and ran harder, his boots pounding the hard-packed earth. He found Adelaide standing by the creek, her rifle pointed at a man sitting on the ground with his hands raised. The man was younger than Quinlan had expected, maybe 20 or 22, with a thin face and nervous eyes. His wire cutters lay on the ground beside him, and Adelaide stood over him with the calm authority of someone who had done this before. "He was cutting the fence by the big cottonwood," Adelaide said as Quinlan approached. "He tried to run when he heard your shot, but his horse bolted, and he tripped in the dark. Twisted his ankle, I think." The young man looked up at Quinlan with a mixture of fear and defiance. "I was not doing anything wrong. I was just passing through. With wire cutters in your hand and my fence half cut behind you?" Quinlan's voice was cold. "Try again." The young man's defiance crumbled. "Look, I was hired to do a job, all right? I do not even know why. Someone paid me $20 to cut your fence every night for 2 weeks. I needed the money." "Who hired you?" Adelaide asked, her voice sharp. "I do not know his name. He approached me in a saloon in Prescott, said he needed someone to cause some trouble for a rancher in Camp Verde. He gave me $10 up front and promised 10 more when the job was done. That is all I know, I swear." "What did he look like?" Quinlan demanded. "Older fellow, maybe 50. Gray beard. Fancy clothes like a businessman. He said something about water rights, about how you did not deserve to own that creek." Water rights. Morrison had been right. Someone wanted Quinlan's access to the creek, badly enough to hire saboteurs to drive him off the land. And if this young man was telling the truth, there was at least one more person involved, the rider who had escaped. "What about the other man?" Adelaide asked. "The one who was working the southern fence?" The young man looked confused. "What other man? It was just me, I swear. I have been working alone every night." Quinlan and Adelaide exchanged glances. If the young man was telling the truth, then who was the second rider? Had someone else seen an opportunity and decided to join in the sabotage, or was this part of a larger plan? "We should take him into town," Adelaide said. "Let the law deal with him." Camp Verde had a deputy sheriff, a man named Thornton who spent most of his time dealing with drunks and property disputes. He would not be thrilled to be woken up in the middle of the night, but he would take custody of the saboteur and send word to Prescott about the man who had hired him. They walked the young man back to Adelaide's property, where she had a wagon. The young man limped on his twisted ankle, and Quinlan kept his rifle trained on him the entire way, though he doubted the boy had much fight left in him. He looked more scared than dangerous, a young man who had made a bad decision and was now facing the consequences. As they loaded him into the wagon, Adelaide climbed up onto the driver's seat and took the reins. "I will take him to Thornton," she said. "You should go back and check the rest of your fence line. Make sure there are no more surprises." "I can come with you," Quinlan offered. "No need. I can handle one scared boy and a wagon ride." Adelaide's tone was matter-of-fact, and Quinlan realized she was right. She had already proven herself more than capable, and he trusted her to see this through. "Thank you," he said, and the words felt inadequate for what she had done tonight. "I mean it. You saved my ranch." Adelaide looked down at him from the wagon seat, and for the first time since he had met her, she smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible in the darkness, but it transformed her face, softening the hard edges and revealing something warm and genuine beneath the careful control. "You are welcome," she said. "Now go check your fence. We will talk more tomorrow." She clicked the reins and the wagon rolled forward, carrying the saboteur toward town and leaving Quinlan standing alone in the darkness. He watched her go, then turned and made his way back to his ranch, his mind spinning with questions and possibilities. The rest of the night passed without incident. Quinlan patrolled his fence line until dawn, finding no new cuts, no signs of the second rider. When the sun finally rose over the eastern hills, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber, he allowed himself to feel something close to relief. They had caught one saboteur and scared off another. Maybe that would be enough to end this nightmare. But as he rode back to his house, exhaustion settling into his bones, he could not shake the feeling that this was far from over. Someone wanted his land badly enough to hire multiple people to destroy it. That kind of determination did not disappear just because one plan had failed. There would be another attempt, another scheme. And next time, it might be worse than cut fences. He also could not stop thinking about Adelaide Ashford. She had appeared in his life like an answer to a prayer he had not known how to voice, offering help without asking for anything in return, except the knowledge that she was protecting her own interests as well. She was capable, intelligent, and unafraid, three qualities that were rare enough individually, but almost unheard of in combination. And there was something else, something he had felt when they shook hands, a connection that went deeper than gratitude or respect. He shook his head, trying to clear the thought. He barely knew the woman. She was his neighbor, his ally in this fight, nothing more. Getting distracted by attraction, or whatever this feeling was, would only complicate things, and his life was already complicated enough. But when Adelaide rode up to his ranch that afternoon, sitting tall in her saddle with the sun behind her, he felt that jolt of connection again, stronger this time, and he knew he was lying to himself about not being interested. "Thornton took custody of the boy," Adelaide said, dismounting. "He sent a telegram to the sheriff in Prescott asking about a man matching the description. He said he would let you know if he hears anything back." "Good." Quinlan gestured toward his house, a simple wood frame structure with a covered porch. "Can I offer you coffee? It is the least I can do after what you did last night." Adelaide hesitated, and for a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she nodded. "Coffee sounds good." They sat on his porch in mismatched chairs, drinking coffee from tin cups and watching the cattle graze in the distance. The silence between them was comfortable, the easy quiet of two people who did not feel the need to fill every moment with words. "You said yesterday that you know what it is like to have someone try to drive you off your land," Quinlan said after a while. "Was that in Philadelphia?" Adelaide was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the desert. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured, careful. "My father owned a textile mill outside Philadelphia. When he died 2 years ago, he left it to me instead of to my uncle, who had been running it for him. My uncle did not take kindly to that. He tried everything he could to force me to sign the mill over to him. Legal challenges, sabotage, threats. When I refused, things got ugly. Someone burned down one of the warehouses. Someone else started rumors that I was mentally unstable, that I should be committed to an asylum for my own good." Quinlan felt cold anger settle in his chest. He had heard of such things, Men using the law and society's prejudices to steal from women who dared to own property or run businesses. What happened? I fought back. I hired lawyers, gathered evidence, and took my uncle to court. It took a year, but I won. The mill was legally mine, and my uncle was ordered to stay away from me and end the business. Adelaide's expression was hard, her jaw set. But winning the legal battle did not stop the harassment. My uncle had friends, business associates, who made it clear that I would never be accepted in Philadelphia society, that I would always be fighting an uphill battle. So I sold the mill, took the money, and came west. If I am going to fight for what is mine, I would rather do it in a place where the rules are simple and honest. The rules out here are not always simple or honest, Quinlan said quietly. But I understand what you mean. At least out here, if someone wants to take what is yours, they have to look you in the eye while they do it. Exactly. Adelaide looked at him, and there was something raw in her expression, something vulnerable that she quickly hid behind her usual composure. I came to Camp Verde because I wanted to start over, to build something that was entirely mine without having to fight off relatives or society or anyone else. When I heard about your fence trouble, I saw my own past reflected in it. I could not stand by and do nothing. I am glad you did not, Quinlan said. I am not sure I could have caught that boy on my own. And even if I had, there is still the matter of whoever hired him. We will figure it out, Adelaide said with quiet confidence. Together. Together. The word hung in the air between them, carrying weight and promise and possibility. Quinlan felt something shift in his chest, a wall he had built around himself beginning to crack and crumble. Over the following days, they fell into a pattern. Adelaide continued working on her property during the day, and Quinlan tended his cattle and repaired the damage to his fences. In the evenings, they met to patrol the fence line together, splitting the work but staying close enough to help each other if trouble appeared. No more cuts appeared, and no more saboteurs showed up in the night, but they maintained their vigilance nonetheless. As they worked together, Quinlan learned more about Adelaide. She was 24 years old, had never been married, and had grown up helping her father run his business despite the social expectation that she should focus on finding a husband instead. She was well educated, having attended a private academy for girls, but her real education had come from working alongside her father, learning about contracts and negotiations and the hard realities of running a business in a world that did not want women to succeed. Adelaide, in turn, learned about Quinlan. He had grown up in Colorado, the son of a miner who had drunk himself to death when Quinlan was 15. After his father's death, he had worked cattle drives to support himself, moving from ranch to ranch and learning everything he could about the business. He had saved every penny for years, living rough and eating cheap until he had enough money to buy his own land. Camp Verde had appealed to him because the land was affordable and the water was reliable, two things that were increasingly rare as more settlers moved west. They discovered they had more in common than either had expected. Both were determined to succeed on their own terms. Both had been underestimated by people who thought they knew better, and both carried scars from past battles that had made them wary of trusting others. But slowly, carefully, they began to trust each other. 2 weeks after they caught the saboteur, Deputy Thornton rode out to Quinlan's ranch with news. Quinlan and Adelaide were repairing a section of fence when they saw him approaching, and they walked together to meet him. "Got word back from Prescott," Thornton said, dismounting. He was a stocky man in his 40s with a weather-beaten face and tired eyes. "The description you gave matches a man named Charles Weatherby. He is a land speculator from back east, been buying up properties around here for the past year. Word is he is working for a big mining company that wants to expand their operations in the Verde Valley." "Mining company?" Quinlan frowned. "There is no ore on my land. I had it surveyed before I bought it." "Maybe not on your land specifically," Thornton said, "but there is copper in the hills north of here, and the company needs water to run their operation. Your creek feeds into the main river that runs through the valley. If they controlled your land, they could divert the water for their own use. Adelaide's expression darkened. So, this was never about driving Quinlan off for the sake of taking his ranch. It was about controlling the water for industrial purposes. That is about the size of it, Thornton agreed. Weatherby has been buying up properties from folks who are struggling, offering them just enough money to make it worth their while to move on, but he does not take kindly to people who refuse to sell. There have been incidents at other ranches, cattle going missing, wells being poisoned, nothing anyone could prove, but enough to make life difficult. Quinlan felt anger rise in his chest, hot and sharp. So what can we do about it? Can you arrest Weatherby? Not without more evidence, Thornton said regretfully. The boy you caught said he did not know the man's name, and he is too scared to testify against him anyway. Weatherby is smart. He keeps his hands clean and lets others do the dirty work. Unless we catch him in the act or find someone willing to testify, we cannot touch him. Then we will get evidence, Adelaide said firmly. If he is behind this, he will try again. And when he does, we will be ready. Thornton looked between them, his expression uncertain. I admire your determination, but be careful. Men like Weatherby do not play fair, and they have resources most folks do not. If you push too hard, someone could get hurt. Someone already has been hurt, Quinlan said. My ranch, my livelihood, my peace of mind. I am not going to let Weatherby or anyone else take what I have worked for. If that means pushing hard, then so be it. After Thornton left, Quinlan and Adelaide stood together by the fence, watching the sun dip toward the western hills. The anger was still there, burning in Quinlan's chest, but there was also a grim determination. He had faced hard times before, and he had always come through them. This would be no different. We need a plan, Adelaide said. If Weatherby is going to make another move, we need to be smart about how we respond. Agreed, but first I think we should find out more about him. If he is buying up properties around here, there must be records, deeds, contracts. Maybe we can find something in Prescott that will give us leverage. I will go, Adelaide said immediately. I have experience dealing with business records and legal documents, and I have a feeling Weatherby might be more likely to let his guard down around a woman than around you. Quinlan did not like the idea of Adelaide going alone, but he could see the logic in it, and he trusted her judgment, trusted her ability to handle herself in difficult situations. All right, he said, but take your rifle and be careful. If Weatherby realizes you are looking into him, he might decide you are as much of a problem as I am. I can handle Charles Weatherby, Adelaide said with quiet confidence. But I appreciate the concern. She left the next morning, riding toward Prescott with her rifle and a saddlebag full of supplies. Quinlan watched her go with a feeling he could not quite name, something between worry and longing, and a fierce protectiveness that surprised him with its intensity. When had she become so important to him? When had the thought of something happening to her become unbearable? He spent the next 3 days working his ranch and trying not to worry. He repaired fences, checked his cattle, and rode into town to pick up supplies. Everyone he talked to had heard about the fence cutting and about Adelaide's role in stopping it. Most people were impressed. A few were skeptical that a woman could handle such trouble, but no one doubted that she had been effective. Morrison, the storekeeper, brought it up when Quinlan stopped by for coffee and flour. That Miss Ashford is quite something. Not many women would take up a rifle and patrol a fence line in the middle of the night. She is remarkable, Quinlan agreed, and he realized as he said it how true it was. Adelaide was remarkable, not just for her courage and capability, but for the way she approached life with unflinching honesty and determination. She did not hide who she was or apologize for her strength. She simply existed, fully and completely, and Quinlan found himself drawn to her in a way he had never experienced before. Adelaide returned on the evening of the third day, riding into camp as the sun was setting. Quinlan had been watching for her from his porch, and he stood as she approached, relief flooding through him. Any trouble? He asked as she dismounted. None, But I found something interesting. Adelaide pulled a folded piece of paper from her saddlebag and handed it to him. Charles Weatherby has been buying properties all along the creek for the past year, like Thornton said, but he has been doing it through shell companies, hiding his involvement so no one realizes how much land he actually controls. I found records at the courthouse showing that he now owns about 60% of the water rights in the Verde Valley. Quinlan unfolded the paper and studied the list of properties and dates. If he gets my land, he will control almost all the water in this part of the valley. Exactly, and I found something else. Adelaide's eyes glinted with satisfaction. Weatherby has been corresponding with the mining company, and one of the clerks at the land office was willing to talk for the right price. According to the letters, the mining company promised Weatherby a substantial commission if he could secure complete control of the water rights by the end of the summer. That gives him about 4 months to get your land, which means he is not going to give up. Quinlan said grimly. No, he is not. But now we know what we are dealing with, and we can plan accordingly. Adelaide paused, then added, There is one more thing. I talked to some of the other ranchers whose properties Weatherby bought. Most of them said they sold because they could not make the land profitable, but a few admitted that they had experienced the same kinds of problems you have been having. Cut fences, missing cattle, wells mysteriously drying up. Weatherby waited until they were desperate, then swooped in with a cash offer that was just enough to make selling seem like the smart choice. He is systematically destroying people's livelihoods to line his own pockets, Quinlan said, his voice cold with anger. Someone needs to stop him. We will, Adelaide said firmly. But we need to be smart about it. Weatherby is powerful and well-connected. If we confront him directly, he will deny everything and then come after us even harder. We need to gather enough evidence to force the law to act, or we need to find a way to make him give up on his own. They spent the rest of the evening strategizing, sitting at Quinlan's kitchen table with coffee and maps spread out before them. It felt natural working together like this, their minds moving in sync as they considered possibilities and discarded ideas that would not work. Quinlan found himself watching Adelaide as she talked, noticing the way her eyes lit up when she had a good idea, the way she tapped her fingers on the table when she was thinking. He liked the way she challenged his assumptions, the way she was not afraid to disagree with him if she thought he was wrong. At some point during the conversation, their hands brushed as they both reached for the same map. The touch was brief, accidental, but it sent electricity racing up Quinlan's arm. Adelaide froze, her eyes meeting his, and he saw something there that matched what he was feeling. A pull, a connection, a recognition. Adelaide, he said, his voice rough. He did not know what he was going to say, did not have words for what he was feeling. I know, she said softly. I feel it too. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other across the table. Then Adelaide stood, gathering the maps with hands that were not quite steady. It is late. I should get back to my place. You could stay, Quinlan offered, then quickly added, I mean, the spare room is available. It is a long ride in the dark. Adelaide smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. Thank you, but I will be fine. I know the way, and my horse is sure-footed. Besides, I think we both need some time to think about what happens next. She was right, of course. There was something building between them, something powerful and undeniable, but they were in the middle of a fight for their land and their futures. Getting distracted now could be dangerous. But as Quinlan walked her out to her horse and watched her ride away into the darkness, he knew that it was already too late. He was already distracted, already thinking about her, when he should have been thinking about fence lines and water rights and Charles Weatherby's schemes. He was falling for Adelaide Ashford, and there was not a damn thing he could do to stop it. The next few weeks were a strange combination of tension and contentment. On one hand, there was the constant worry about Weatherby's next move, the vigilance required to protect the ranch, the knowledge that they were up against someone with far more resources and connections than they had. On the other hand, there was the simple pleasure of working alongside Adelaide, of spending evenings talking on his porch or hers, of learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. They continued to patrol the fence line together, but now there was an ease between them that had not been there before, a comfort that came from trust and growing affection. Quinlan found himself looking forward to the evenings, not because he was worried about sabotage, but because it meant spending time with Adelaide. They talked about everything, from their childhoods to their hopes for the future, from books they had read to places they wanted to see. Quinlan learned that Adelaide loved thunderstorms and hated tea, that she had a weakness for penny dreadfuls despite her sophisticated education, and that she dreamed of building a ranch that would be known throughout the territory for the quality of its livestock. Adelaide learned that Quinlan had a talent for whittling, that he was terrified of deep water because he had nearly drowned as a child, and that his greatest fear was ending up like his father, alone and broken by the world. "You are nothing like your father," Adelaide said one evening, as they sat by the creek, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. "You are strong and determined and good. You have built something real here, something worth fighting for. I could not have held on to it without you," Quinlan said honestly. "When you showed up that day in Morrison's store, I was running out of options. I was angry and desperate, and I did not know how much longer I could keep fighting alone. You changed everything." Adelaide turned to look at him, her face soft in the starlight. "You would have found a way. You are too stubborn to give up. Maybe, but I am glad I did not have to find out." Quinlan reached out and took her hand, his heart pounding. "Adelaide, I need to tell you something. I know this is complicated, and I know we are in the middle of a fight that could end badly for both of us. But I care about you, more than I have cared about anyone in a long time. And I think, maybe, odds you feel the same way." "I do," Adelaide said, her voice steady, despite the emotion in her eyes. "I have been trying not to, trying to stay focused on practical matters, but the truth is, I think about you constantly. I admire your strength and your integrity, and I feel safe with you in a way I have never felt safe with anyone else." "Then let us stop pretending this is not happening," Quinlan said. "Let us stop trying to keep our distance and just admit that we want to be together." "What if Weatherby wins?" Adelaide asked quietly. "What if we lose everything we have been fighting for?" "Then we will lose it together," Quinlan said, "and we will start over somewhere else, together. But I do not think we are going to lose. I think we are going to win because we are smarter and tougher than Weatherby gives us credit for. And when we do win, I want you by my side, not as my neighbor or my ally, but as the woman I love." Adelaide drew in a sharp breath, her eyes widening. "You love me?" "I do," Quinlan said simply. "I did not plan to, and I did not expect to, but I do. I love you, Adelaide Ashford, and I want to build a life with you if you will have me." For a moment, Adelaide said nothing, and Quinlan felt his heart sink. Had he misjudged her feelings? Had he moved too fast, pushed too hard? Then Adelaide leaned forward and kissed him, her lips soft and warm against his. It was a gentle kiss, sweet and tentative, but it carried the weight of everything they had been through together and everything they hoped to build. Quinlan wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and deepened the kiss, pouring all his hope and longing into it. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Adelaide rested her forehead against his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I have been afraid to admit it, afraid that wanting something this much would mean losing it. But I do love you, Quinlan, and I want to build a life with you too." They sat together by the creek for hours, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that seemed suddenly bright and possible. When Adelaide finally rode home, Quinlan felt lighter than he had in months, as if a burden he had not known he was carrying had been lifted from his shoulders. But their happiness was short-lived. 3 days later, Quinlan woke to find his cattle missing. Not scattered, not wandered off, but gone, as if they had been driven away deliberately during the night. He rode out immediately, following the tracks, and found them 5 miles away, on land, owned by one of Weatherby's shell companies. Someone had cut his fence, driven his cattle onto the other property, and then repaired the fence behind them, making it look like Quinlan's cattle had trespassed. When he tried to retrieve his cattle, he was met by 2 armed men who claimed to be working for the property owner. They told him that if his cattle were found on their land again, they would be confiscated and sold to pay for damages. Quinlan rode straight to Adelaide's ranch, fury and fear warring in his chest. She took one look at his face and knew something was wrong. "Weatherby made his move," Quinlan said grimly. "He is trying to steal my cattle by making it look like they are trespassing on his property." "Did you talk to Thornton?" "He is out of town, will not be back until tomorrow. By then, Weatherby could have sold my cattle or moved them somewhere I will never find them." Adelaide's expression hardened. "Then we will get them back ourselves. Tonight." "Adelaide, those men were armed. If we try to take the cattle back by force, someone could get killed." "We are not going to use force," Adelaide said. "We are going to use the law. Weatherby is trying to manipulate the system to his advantage, but he is not the only one who knows how to play that game. Your cattle have your brand on them, correct?" "Of course." "Then we have proof that they belong to you. We ride to Prescott tonight, file an official complaint with the sheriff, and get a court order requiring Weatherby to return your property. It will take time, but it will protect you legally. And if Weatherby tries to sell the cattle before the order goes through, he will be committing theft, which is a crime even the most corrupt judge cannot ignore." It was a solid plan, better than anything Quinlan had come up with in his anger and frustration. But it meant leaving the ranch unprotected for at least 2 days, and he did not trust Weatherby not to do more damage in his absence. "I will go to Prescott," Adelaide said, reading his mind. "You stay here and protect your land. I can handle the legal paperwork, and I will be back as soon as I can." "No," Quinlan said firmly. "It is too dangerous for you to go alone. If Weatherby finds out what you are doing, he might try to stop you." "Then we both go," Adelaide said. "We lock up our properties, bring our weapons, and ride hard. With luck, we can be there and back in less than 48 hours. They left within the hour, riding toward Prescott with their rifles and a determination born of desperation. The journey was long and hot, the sun beating down on them as they crossed the desert and climbed into the mountains. They stopped only to rest the horses and refill their canteens, pushing hard to make the best time possible. They reached Prescott late the next afternoon, dusty and exhausted, but determined. The town was larger than Camp Verde, a proper city with brick buildings and paved streets and all the trappings of civilization. Adelaide led the way to the courthouse, where they spent the next 2 hours navigating the bureaucracy and filing the necessary paperwork. The clerk was skeptical at first, clearly more inclined to believe a wealthy land speculator than 2 dusty ranchers, but Adelaide was relentless, citing laws and precedents, until the clerk had no choice but to process their complaint. By the time they emerged from the courthouse with the court order in hand, the sun was setting and both of them were swaying with exhaustion. They found a modest hotel, took separate rooms, and collapsed into sleep with their boots still on. The next morning, they started the journey back to Camp Verde. But this time, they were not alone. As they rode through a narrow canyon about halfway home, they found their path blocked by 3 riders. One of them was Charles Weatherby himself, a well-dressed man in his 50s with a gray beard and cold eyes. "Mr. Ingram, Miss Ashford," Weatherby said, his voice smooth and cultured. "I thought we might have a conversation before you go any further." Quinlan's hand moved toward his rifle, but Adelaide touched his arm, a silent warning. They were outnumbered, and in a narrow canyon there was nowhere to run. "What do you want, Weatherby?" Quinlan asked, his voice hard. "I want to make you an offer," Weatherby said. "You are both intelligent people, and I am sure you have realized by now that you cannot win this fight. I have resources, connections, and time on my side. You have nothing but stubbornness, and a misplaced sense of justice. I am prepared to offer you a fair price for your land, both of you, more than you could make in 10 years of ranching. Take the money, go somewhere else. Start over. It is the smart choice." "We are not selling," Adelaide said flatly, "and we have a court order requiring you to return Quinlan's cattle. If you do not comply, you will be arrested for theft." Weatherby smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "That court order is a piece of paper, Miss Ashford. It only has power if someone enforces it, and I have friends in the sheriff's office who owe me favors. You are wasting your time." "Maybe," Quinlan said, "but we are going to try anyway. Now get out of our way." For a long moment, Weatherby stared at them, his expression unreadable. Then he gestured to his men, and they moved aside, clearing the path. "You are making a mistake," Weatherby said as they rode past. "A mistake you will regret." "We will take our chances," Adelaide said without looking back. They rode hard for the rest of the day, not stopping until they were back on Quinlan's land. To their relief, the ranch was untouched, the fences intact, and the house just as they had left it. But the tension did not ease. Weatherby's threat hung over them like a storm cloud, dark and ominous. "He is not going to give up," Adelaide said as they unsaddled their horses in Quinlan's corral. "That court order might slow him down, but it will not stop him. He will find another way to come at us." "I know," Quinlan said, "but at least we bought ourselves some time, and we proved that we are not going to roll over and let him take what is ours." They spent the next few days in a state of high alert, watching for any sign of trouble. True to Adelaide's prediction, a deputy showed up 3 days later with the court order, and Quinlan was able to retrieve his cattle. But the victory felt hollow. They had won one battle, but the war was far from over. And then unexpectedly, Weatherby made a mistake. It came in the form of a young man named Samuel Pierce, one of the ranch hands who had been working for Weatherby. Samuel showed up at Quinlan's ranch one evening, his face pale and his hands shaking. "I need to talk to you," Samuel said. "It is about Mr. Weatherby." Quinlan and Adelaide exchanged glances, then invited Samuel inside. He sat at the kitchen table, accepting a cup of coffee with trembling hands. "I have been working for Mr. Weatherby for 6 months," Samuel said. "He hired me to help manage the properties he has been buying up, keeping an eye on things and making sure no one was causing trouble. But lately, he has been asking me to do things that are not right. Cutting fences, scaring off ranchers, making threats. I did not want to do it, but he paid well, and I needed the money." "What changed?" Adelaide asked gently. "Last week he told me to burn down your barn," Samuel said, looking at Quinlan with haunted eyes. "He said he wanted to send a message to show you that he was serious about getting your land. I told him I would not do it, that I was done working for him. He threatened me, said if I walked away, he would make sure I never got work in this territory again, but I could not do it. I could not hurt innocent people just to line his pockets." "Are you willing to testify against him?" Adelaide asked. "To tell the sheriff what he asked you to do?" Samuel hesitated, fear and determination warring on his face. "If I do that, Weatherby will come after me. He has friends everywhere. I could end up in jail or worse. Or you could end up free," Quinlan said quietly. "Free from working for a man who has no conscience, free from the guilt of knowing you helped him hurt people. We can protect you, Samuel. We can make sure you have a place to stay and work that pays honestly. But we need your testimony to stop Weatherby for good." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. "All right, I will do it. But you have to promise me that when this is over, he will not be able to hurt anyone else." "We promise," Adelaide said. They rode to Prescott the next morning, all 3 of them, with Samuel's written testimony in Adelaide's saddlebag. This time the sheriff took them seriously. With Samuel's detailed account of Weatherby's illegal activities, including attempts at arson and conspiracy to commit theft, the sheriff had no choice but to arrest Weatherby and launch a full investigation. The trial took place 6 weeks later. Quinlan and Adelaide sat in the courtroom, watching as Samuel gave his testimony with a steady voice and unwavering conviction. Other witnesses came forward, ranchers who had been pressured by Weatherby, clerks who had helped him hide his illegal dealings. The evidence was overwhelming, and the jury took less than 2 hours to reach a verdict. Charles Weatherby was found guilty of conspiracy, attempted arson, and theft. He was sentenced to 10 years in prison and ordered to pay restitution to all the ranchers he had harmed. His shell companies were dissolved, and his ill-gotten properties were returned to their rightful owners or sold at auction. When it was over, Quinlan and Adelaide walked out of the courthouse into the bright afternoon sun, feeling as if a massive weight had been lifted from their shoulders. "We did it," Adelaide said, her voice full of wonder. "We actually did it." "We did," Quinlan agreed. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "And now we can finally focus on the future instead of just surviving the present." They returned to Camp Verde as heroes, or at least as people who had stood up to corruption and won. The town threw a celebration in their honor, and for one night, they allowed themselves to relax and enjoy the victory. But even as they danced together under the stars, Quinlan knew that this was just the beginning of their story, not the end. 2 months after Weatherby's trial, on a cool October evening with the cottonwoods turning gold along the creek, Quinlan asked Adelaide to marry him. He did it simply, without grand gestures or fancy speeches, just the two of them sitting on his porch as the sun set. "Marry me," he said, holding her hand in both of his. "Build this life with me. Let us combine our ranches and our dreams and make something that will last." "Yes," Adelaide said, her eyes shining with tears and laughter and love. "Yes, 1,000 times yes." They were married in Camp Verde on a Saturday in November, with half the town in attendance. It was a simple ceremony, held outside under a vast blue sky, with the desert stretched out around them in shades of gold and rust and amber. Adelaide wore a dress of ivory lace that she had ordered from Prescott, and Quinlan wore his best suit, brushed clean and pressed for the occasion. Morrison stood up as his best man, and one of the neighboring ranchers, a woman named Catherine Hollis, stood up for Adelaide. The local minister performed the ceremony, reading from a worn Bible and speaking about love and partnership and the courage it took to build a life together in a hard land. When he pronounced them husband and wife, Quinlan kissed Adelaide with all the love and promise he felt, and the crowd erupted into cheers and applause. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. Quinlan and Adelaide moved through it all in a haze of happiness, accepting congratulations and well wishes from people who had once been strangers but had become friends and neighbors. When it was finally over and they returned to Quinlan's ranch, which was now their ranch, Adelaide looked around at the simple house and the rough-hewn furniture and the life they were beginning together. "It is perfect," she said. "It is home," Quinlan agreed. "Our home." They spent the winter combining their properties, merging Quinlan's cattle operation with Adelaide's plans for improvement. Adelaide had ideas for better grazing rotation, for improving the bloodlines of the herd, for building a reputation that would allow them to command top prices at market. Quinlan had the practical experience and the knowledge of the land, the understanding of when to push and when to be patient. Together they made a formidable team. By spring, their combined ranch was thriving, with healthy cattle, strong fences, and a growing reputation throughout the territory. They hired Samuel Pierce to help manage the day-to-day operations, giving him the steady work and honest pay he had been seeking when he first went to work for Weatherby. Life settled into a rhythm, a pattern of work and rest and quiet contentment. Quinlan woke each morning with Adelaide beside him and felt a gratitude so profound it sometimes brought tears to his eyes. After so many years of being alone, of fighting for survival, and never quite feeling like he belonged anywhere, he had found a place and a person that felt like home. Adelaide felt the same way. She had come to Camp Verde looking for a fresh start, a place where she could prove herself without the shadow of her past hanging over her. She had found that, but she had also found something she had not been looking for, a partner who saw her as an equal, who valued her mind and her strength as much as her heart. In the summer of 1883, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant. She told Quinlan one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, and he responded by sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around, his face alight with joy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder, "a child to carry on what we have built here." "Our child," Adelaide said, her hands resting on her still flat belly. "A new generation for a new life." Their son was born in February of 1884, during a brief cold snap that left frost on the windows and ice along the creek. The birth was hard, lasting nearly a full day, but when it was over and Adelaide held their son in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. They named him Thomas after Quinlan's grandfather, and he was a healthy, loud baby with his mother's gray-green eyes and his father's dark hair. Quinlan held him with hands that were gentle despite their calluses, cradling the tiny life they had created and marveling at the miracle of it. "He is perfect," Quinlan whispered. "Absolutely perfect." "He is ours," Adelaide said, her voice full of love and pride. "Our son, our future." As Thomas grew, the ranch grew with him. Quinlan and Adelaide expanded their operation, buying the property to the east when it came up for sale, and building a second house for Samuel Pierce, who had proven himself to be more than just an employee, but a true friend. They became pillars of the Camp Verde community, respected for their hard work, their integrity, and their willingness to help their neighbors in times of trouble. When Thomas was 3, they had a daughter, Elizabeth, named for Adelaide's mother. She was a fierce, determined child from the moment she was born, and she grew up learning to ride and rope alongside her brother. 2 years after Elizabeth came another son, Jacob, who was quieter and more thoughtful than his siblings, but just as loved. The ranch that Quinlan and Adelaide built became one of the most successful in the Verde Valley, known throughout Arizona for the quality of their cattle and the fairness of their dealings. They weathered droughts and floods, harsh winters and scorching summers, always supporting each other through the difficult times and celebrating together in the good times. On their 20th anniversary, they stood together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Thomas was 22 now, a strong young man who was beginning to take over more of the ranch operations. Elizabeth was 17, beautiful and headstrong, and determined to become a veterinarian, a profession that was still rare for women, but that Adelaide encouraged with fierce pride. Jacob was 15, helping his father repair fences and learning every aspect of the business with quiet dedication. "Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been?" Adelaide asked, leaning against Quinlan's shoulder. "If I had not walked into Morrison's store that day, if I had not offered to help with the fence cutting?" "I think about it all the time," Quinlan said, wrapping his arm around her waist. "I think about how lucky I am that you did walk in that day, that you saw someone in trouble and decided to help instead of looking the other way. You saved my ranch, Adelaide, but more than that, you saved me. You gave me a life worth living." "We saved each other," Adelaide corrected gently. "You gave me a place to belong, a partner who respects me, a family I never thought I would have. Everything good in my life started the day I met you." "Then here is to that day," Quinlan said, raising an imaginary glass, "and to all the days that came after, and all the days still to come." They kissed as the sun set over the Arizona desert, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Their children called to them from the yard, and they went to join them, walking hand in hand toward the life they had built together. The years continued to pass, bringing changes and challenges and joys. Thomas married a schoolteacher from Prescott and brought her home to the ranch, adding another generation to the family legacy. Elizabeth went to university in California, studying veterinary medicine and returning home with a degree and a fierce determination to modernize ranching practices in Arizona. Jacob took over the day-to-day management of the ranch, proving himself to be a gifted manager with a talent for negotiation and planning. Quinlan and Adelaide grew older together, their hair turning gray and their bodies slowing down, but their love never diminished. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year, deepened by shared experiences and mutual respect, and the knowledge that they had built something lasting. On a warm spring evening in 1907, 25 years after that first night, when Adelaide had stayed up with a rifle to protect Quinlan's fence, they sat together on the porch of their home. The ranch stretched out around them, prosperous and thriving, a testament to their hard work and determination. Their children and grandchildren were gathered in the yard, 3 generations of the family they had started with nothing but love and hope and stubborn courage. "We did well," Quinlan said, his hand finding Adelaide's as naturally as breathing. "Better than I ever dreamed possible." "We did," Adelaide agreed. Her hair was silver now, pulled back in the same practical bun she had worn when they first met, and her eyes were still the same gray-green, still sharp and intelligent and full of life. "We took what could have been a tragedy and turned it into a triumph. We fought for what was ours and built something beautiful." "I love you," Quinlan said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he spoke them by the creek all those years ago. "I will always love you." "And I love you," Adelaide said, "forever and always until the stars stop shining and the desert stops dreaming." They sat together as the sun set, their hands intertwined, watching their family and their legacy, and knowing that everything they had fought for, everything they had built, would continue long after they were gone. The fence that someone had cut all those nights had been the beginning of their story, but it was far from the ending. The ending was this: love, family, and a life lived fully and without regret. In the gathering dusk, with the voices of their grandchildren carried on the evening breeze and the land they loved spreading out in all directions, Quinlan and Adelaide knew that they had found what so many people searched for their entire lives: a place to belong, a person to love, and a purpose worth fighting for. They had started with nothing but determination and hope, and they had built an empire of the heart that would last for generations. And it had all begun with a cut fence and a woman brave enough to stay up with a rifle and end it.